22 years of dedication without a single lazy day, yet just to save a few bucks, he replaced by a young guy who'd never known the meaning of sweat on a factory floor. But 6 months later, the entire plant came crawling back to the man they once cast aside. In a small town in Ohio, where industrial plants still form the backbone of the community, there was one man deeply respected by everyone on the floor. Tom Miller, 58, head technician at Midwest Tech Industries, a heavy equipment manufacturing plant. Tom wasn't a loud man. He lived simply, always wore an old baseball cap, kept a pen in his shirt pocket and had hands stained with machine grease. But ask anyone who'd worked with him, and they'd nod without hesitation. Want the machines to run smooth? Ask Tom. Need the line unclogged? Get Tom. For 22 years, Tom worked nearly every single day. Whether it was snowstorms, power outages, or late-night shifts, he always showed up early, unlocked the plant, and checked every bolt before the line started running. Tom could recognize any strange sound from a machine. Tom didn't go to college. He was a hands-on learner, starting as an apprentice and working his way up through sweat and dedication. He once fixed a failing engine at 3 a.m. just to help the plant make a critical shipment. Thanks to him, the company kept a multi-million-dollar contract. He wasn't just skilled. Tom was the heartbeat of the technical team. New hires were often mentored by him, guided carefully, not harshly but with seriousness. Everyone respected him because he was genuine. No office politics, no sucking up to the bosses, and he never took credit that wasn't his. Then, after over 2 decades of loyalty, the unthinkable happened. One morning like any other, Tom walked into the tech team's meeting room and saw the new management sitting there, along with a sharply dressed young man wearing a shiny watch. His name was Jake Benson, 28, introduced as the next-gen technical lead. The meeting was brief. In just 15 minutes, Tom was informed that the plant was undergoing restructuring and his position would be transitioned to Jake. Jake's per existing sounded reasonable enough. We need to optimize operational costs and adopt a more modern, flexible approach. Tom was offered early retirement with a token severance package. No heartfelt thanks, no formal farewell. Just a few half-hearted handshakes from new managers who had never spent more than 10 minutes on the factory floor. And Tom's longtime co-workers? They stayed silent, not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid. Everyone knew speaking up could make them the next to be restructured. Tom walked out with a cardboard box holding a few personal items, a miniature engine model he'd built for training, some worn-out technical notebooks, and a dusty certificate of recognition from 2012 that no one remembered. But what management didn't realize was that by pushing Tom out that door, they didn't just lose a worker. They abandoned the soul of the entire system. The things he knew, the things he'd done, the instincts no manual could capture, all vanished with his silhouette in the fading afternoon light of the loading dock. What happens when the man who understands every bolt is replaced by someone who's never gotten his hands dirty? That short meeting ended in brutal finality. Tom Miller left the plant like a ghost, quiet, without complaint. But inside him something had broken. Back home, Tom sat for hours on the wooden chair behind his porch. The house, once a peaceful haven, now felt eerily hollow. He stared at his hands, calloused, scarred, physical proof of decades of hard work, and now, all of it felt meaningless. No one in management bothered to ask if he had anything to hand over. No one cared that Jake, his replacement, had never worked with the old analog systems that still made up a large part of the production line. The plant was a blend of old and new tech, and Tom was the only one who knew how to make both work seamlessly together. Now, a 28-year-old fresh out of school with a couple of years in office work was expected to handle a complex system, simply because his salary was half the cost. Jake arrived like a rising star, always on his phone, dressed sharp, speaking in buzzwords. But he didn't know the plant wasn't powered by PowerPoint slides or Excel reports. It ran on real floor experience, on instincts honed through trial, error, and sweat. On Jake's first day, he lost signal from an old sensor. Thought it was no big deal. But not knowing how to fix it, he shut down the entire line for 2 hours, throwing the whole plant into chaos. He blamed outdated equipment, unaware that all it took was twisting the cable and waiting 10 seconds, exactly how Tom had handled it for years. Yet the leadership turned a blind eye. They needed Jake to succeed to prove their decision right. Even though he kept missing maintenance deadlines, submitting inaccurate reports, and suggesting impractical changes, it was all brushed off under the banner of innovation and learning. Meanwhile, the old crew, those who had worked under Tom, started feeling increasingly uneasy. No one to ask when machines made odd noises, no one to remind them of routine system checks. The tech department now run on gut feelings and Jake's guesses. What about Tom? He never returned to the factory. No emails, no messages left behind. But from time to time he received a few discreet phone calls from former coworkers. Uncle, there's a burnt smell coming from the control panel, but no one can fix it. Uncle Tom, do you remember how you used to check the old hydraulic pump? Now it's vibrating constantly and no one dares touch it. Tom just quietly listened, then gave his usual warning, watch out for high voltage. If you're not sure, don't touch it. He knew he wasn't there anymore. And he also knew the chaos was only just beginning. But what hurt Tom the most wasn't being replaced. It was how quickly he was forgotten. As if those 20+ years had never happened. Everything he had built, from the operating systems and technical notes to the maintenance flowcharts, no one bothered to preserve. Jake was confident he would rebuild everything from scratch in a more modern way. Tom gave a bitter smile when he heard that. He understood something Jake had never experienced. Engineering isn't something you can fully learn from books, and machines don't forgive those who underestimate them. Tom didn't fall apart immediately after being replaced, but losing his job after 22 years of dedication, especially being replaced by someone with little real-world experience, wasn't easy to swallow. Especially for a man who had lived his entire life by his work and his sense of duty. That first week after leaving the factory, Tom still woke up early out of habit, still made his coffee at 6 a.m., still put on his old work shirt and walked out to the garage like he was heading into a shift. But then, he just stood there, looking at the neatly arranged tools, his hand brushing over the worn handle of a wrench, not knowing what to do next. No place to go, no one needing him. That feeling, for someone who had once been the backbone of an entire production line, hurt more than losing the job itself. In the days that followed, Tom started trying to find new work, but at nearly 60 years old, in an industry being rejuvenated, his resume was often passed over without a second glance. A few small companies called to ask questions, but once they heard he had worked at a large factory, they hesitated. Are you sure you'd be okay working in a small place like this? We're looking for someone experienced with automation, not the old school kind. Tom understood he was no longer anyone's first choice. He moved on to odd jobs, fixing washing machine, doing residential electrical work, even driving part-time for a local delivery company. Not for the money, though his severance was slowly running out, but because he needed to feel useful. Meanwhile, the old factory kept operating, at least on paper. Some of Tom's old co-workers would occasionally message to check in. A few sighed. We're still here, this wouldn't be happening. The industrial cooling system broke down twice. Jake still can't fix it. The old sensor burned out, and he said, just replace the whole system to save time. Tom read these in silence, not because he missed it, but because he knew this would happen, and there was nothing he could do. He began jotting down potential failure points of the systems he had worked on, as if preparing a manual no one had asked for. His wife Linda saw this and quietly said, "You still haven't let go, have you?" Tom didn't answer, but deep inside something was starting to take shape. A preparation not to go back, but to face forward. Because he knew the cost of replacing experience with cheapness was never small, and if the new leadership thought they had sidelined an outdated old man, they were about to pay, with the fate of the entire plant. But Tom wasn't waiting. He didn't seek revenge, didn't go around exposing anyone. He chose his own path, quiet, patient, and clear-minded. One day, while fixing a machine at a local mechanics shop, he met a young engineer who had also left Midwest Tech due to the stress. They ended up talking for nearly an hour after the job was done, and the young man said something that lingered with Tom. You know, I think someone like you should start a technical consulting service for mid-size factories. Out there, a lot of places don't have people who know how to run hybrid systems like you do. Tom smiled softly at the time, but when he got home, he pulled out his old notebooks, looked through the technical drawings he had kept for years, and for the first time in many months, a new direction sparked in his mind. The world hadn't completely turned its back on him. He just needed to find his way back to his place in a different way. And when the time came, he would be ready. Meanwhile, the old factory, the one that had cast him aside like an obsolete tool, was slowly heading into disorder, day by day, hour by hour, and no one even noticed. While Tom was gradually rediscovering purpose after the shock of being laid off, across town at Midwest Tech Industries, once the pride of the local economy, the factory began to tremble like a ship veering off course. At first, everything seemed quiet. Jake Benson, the tech superstar praised by the new management, confidently led the technical department. With his polished look and well-defined reports, Jake convinced leadership that the restructural mark was on track. But behind the flashy numbers was a chaotic reality. The first incident happened in the second month after Tom left. A hydraulic assembly line suddenly shut down during peak hours. The system reported unstable pressure valve readings. Instead of checking each contact point like Tom used to do in 15 minutes, Jake had the team replace the entire valve unit worth over $12,000, 0 cents, but the issue remained unresolved. It took 3 days and 2 visits from engineers at the parent company to finally pinpoint the problem: a clogged oil filter, something Tom had reminded the technicians to check weekly, but no one remembered those old habits anymore. Jake believed that traditional procedures were outdated and a waste of time. That incident cost the factory a delivery contract with a Japanese partner, nearly $80,000, 0 cents in losses, not to mention the damage to their reputation. Not long after, the electrical control system in the packaging zone short-circuited during a heavy rainstorm. Water had leaked from the roof, causing an old circuit board to fail. Tom had repeatedly warned about insulation issues in that area and had even marked the danger zone on a technical diagram, but when Jake took over, all the paper diagrams were cleaned up to transition to digital data, a digitized version that wasn't even complete. The result? The entire packaging zone was paralyzed for nearly a week. More than 40 workers had to take temporary leave. A partner company threatened to cut ties due to late deliveries. Everything started unraveling, and these were no longer minor issues. The production line became unstable, downtime increased by 40%. The young technicians Jake had recruited were overwhelmed and lost, with no one experienced enough to resolve the complex interplay between old equipment and new technology. Jake, the one who had once boldly claimed he would upgrade the entire plant to Industry 4 standards, was now flustered, losing composure, frequently calling vendors for help. But even those companies insisted. There needs to be someone who understands the old systems in order to guide a proper transition. But that person, well, the pressure mounted each day. The board of directors began to feel uneasy as several long-standing clients started withdrawing their orders. In an internal meeting, when asked why production progress continued to lag, Jake gave a vague response. The equipment is outdated and the processes are inefficient. We need more budget for upgrades. Some middle managers began whispering among themselves. We never saw these issues before, did we? How come everything's falling apart since Tom left? No one said it aloud. No one dared mention his name in the meeting. But deep down, many were beginning to feel haunted by the name Tom Miller. Then the worst happened. A serious accident. A machine operator slipped while handling a press due to a delayed sensor signal. Though it wasn't life-threatening, he broke his arm and had to be hospitalized. Local news started covering the story. Workplace safety inspectors got involved. Upon review, they found that the machine's alert system hadn't undergone scheduled maintenance for 4 months, a procedure Tom had once closely monitored. Now the chaos was no longer confined behind the factory walls. It had spilled out into the town. Workers whispered among themselves. If only Mr. Tom were still here. He never let a single machine go past its maintenance deadline. Jake talks. Mr. Tom gets things done. And then, in an emergency meeting, amid an atmosphere tense as a drawn wire, a board member quietly said what everyone was thinking but afraid to voice. Maybe. We were too hasty in letting Tom Miller go. At that moment, all eyes in the room fell silent. No one objected. No one nodded either. But they all knew. The nightmare wasn't over yet, and if no one who truly understood the system stepped in to pull the factory back from the edge, everything would collapse. Literally. On a gloomy Tuesday afternoon, just after Tom had finished repairing an industrial refrigerator for a small diner on the outskirts of town, his phone rang, an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end sounded hesitant. "Hello, Mr. Miller. This is Patrick Evans, head of human resources at Midwest Tech. We were wondering if you could spare a little time to meet with us tomorrow afternoon." Tom was silent for a few seconds, not because he didn't recognize the name, but because he hadn't expected the call to come so soon. After a brief pause, he replied in a calm, steady voice. "I have time. Would 3 p.m. work?" The voice on the other end let out a relieved breath. "Perfect, we'll meet you at the main office." After hanging up, Tom looked out through the dusty windshield of his old pickup truck, where the sunset cast a golden hue across the glass. He wasn't joyful, nor triumphant. He simply felt that what was bound to happen had finally come. The next afternoon, Tom walked into the Midwest Tech building on the very steps he had climbed thousands of times before. But this time the feeling was completely different. The hallways were spotless, the digital signs sleek and modern, but the air felt heavy. The receptionist nodded at him with slight hesitation. A few young engineers glanced at him through the glass, whispering among themselves. Some recognized him, and they didn't smile like they used to. Their eyes now held something else, a hint of awkwardness, and even, perhaps, respect. Patrick Evans led him into the meeting room on the second floor. 4 people were already seated: the new CEO, the chief technical officer, the head of finance, and Jake Benson. Jake looked at Tom, his face slightly pale, forcing a weak smile. "Hello, Mr. Miller. It's really good to see you again." Tom gave a slight nod without shaking hands. His eyes scanned around the table, as if trying to figure out the real reason they had invited him back, though deep down he already knew 90% of the story. The CEO spoke up, cutting straight to the point. "Mr. Tom, we'd like to invite you back to help the plant through a difficult period. Specifically, we're offering you a role as senior technical advisor to help stabilize the system that's currently in trouble." Tom crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "You're inviting me back because I bring value? Or because you don't have anyone else?" The room fell silent. Patrick swallowed hard. Jake looked down. The CEO tried to maintain a professional tone. "I believe it's both. You're the only one who understands the system from the ground up. We admit we underestimated your role." Tom didn't smile. He replied slowly but clearly. "I have no intention of returning as a full-time employee, but if you truly need me to keep this plant from falling apart, I can work as an independent contractor." The CFO quickly asked, "What kind of rate are you proposing?" Tom named a figure that made the entire room pause for a moment. 3 times his former salary, not including travel allowances and the right to veto any technically unsound decisions. Jake frowned slightly, but no one objected. Tom continued, "I'm not asking this for recognition. It's because of the times you didn't listen to me. From now on, if I come back, I need full technical authority within my scope. No politics, no interference." The room was silent for a few seconds, then the CEO nodded. "We agree." A week later, Tom officially returned to the plant, but this time in a different role, senior advisor with technical authority second to none. On his first day, he didn't go to the office. Instead, he went straight to the production floor. He walked past each machine, opened each control panel, checked every parameter. The young engineers followed him, at first hesitant, then quietly pulling out their notebooks. Jake stood outside, silent and powerless. Tom didn't scold anyone, nor did he judge. But within just 3 days, he identified 7 major technical issues, 2 of which could have led to explosions if left unresolved. He began rebuilding the maintenance schedule, rewriting the operations manual, retraining the technical team, and most importantly, restoring the mechanical line diagram he once hand-drew, something no digital version could replace. Word spread quickly throughout the factory. Old workers, those who once saw him as a mentor, started coming back to consult him daily. As for the management team, although they kept their distance, everyone knew. Without Tom Miller, Midwest Tech would soon become a pile of scrap metal. 3 weeks after returning to Midwest Tech as senior technical advisor, Tom Miller had become the center of attention in the plant. Not because of his new title, but because everything was finally getting back on track. Something no one had been able to do for the past 6 months. With his expertise and intimate understanding of the system down to every bolt, Tom didn't need simulation software or digital dashboards. One morning, while inspecting the booster unit of the central air compression system, which had been costing the plant thousands of dollars each week due to pressure leak, Tom pointed to a pinhole-sized gap in a pipe and said, "Right here. If you don't replace the pressure clamp, it'll blow when the temperature hits 140 degrees. Write it down and get the replacement ordered." The young engineer beside him was stunned. While they had spent 3 weeks without finding the root cause, Tom had solved it in under 3 minutes. Not long after, project managers began checking with him before implementing any changes. Some engineers who had once been hesitant now proactively sought his guidance. What started as brief technical consultations soon evolved into mini training sessions, where Tom not only pointed out errors but also explained operational principles, preventive maintenance, and early risk detection methods. One day, while he was repairing the control board of the automated welding line, Jake Benson, the man who had once replaced him, quietly stepped into the workshop. He stood behind Tom, still holding a printed technical diagram from the computer. "Mr. Miller, I can't manage this system. It's too complicated, and I was wrong." Tom didn't turn around. He kept tightening the bolt and replied in a steady, deep voice, "You weren't wrong for not knowing. You were wrong for thinking experience could be replaced by reports and software. This isn't an office. This is a factory, and here, everything has a soul." Jake lowered his head. He said nothing more. From that day on, he no longer appeared in a leadership role, but quietly stepped back into a technical support position, something never officially announced but everyone understood. 3 months after Tom's return, the Midwest Tech plant had reduced downtime by 85%. The product defect rate had nearly returned to previous levels. Former partners, once hesitant, started placing orders again. Many customers even sent personal thank you notes to Tom for helping the plant regain its reputation. But what moved Tom the most wasn't the praise or the generous compensation. It was when the old workers, who once worked with him, came to shake his hand, looked him straight in the eye and said, "We're glad you came back. No one can replace you here. If it weren't for you, we would have lost our jobs." Then one day the CEO invited Tom to the meeting room. The room no longer carried the awkwardness of the first time he came back. Will spoke formally. "We'd like to officially offer you the position of Chief Technical Officer, a title worthy of the role and effort you've put in. Full authority over production systems and technical team training." Tom sat silently. He looked at the visitor badge hanging around his neck. Then he took it off and placed it gently on the table. "I don't need a title. I just need to see this place running well and the people working here being valued. I'll accept, but only as an independent contractor. Free, transparent." The CEO smiled. No one objected. Because by now, everyone understood that real value didn't lie in titles, but in the capability and trust that Tom had restored throughout the system. That evening, Tom drove his pickup truck along the old road. The cornfields on both sides still rustled in the wind, just like years ago. But inside, everything had changed. He was no longer the one who got replaced. Sometimes justice doesn't come through punishment. It comes through return with quiet strength and unwavering resolve. 4 months after Tom Miller returned to Midwest Tech, the entire factory felt reborn. The production lines ran smoothly, product defect rates dropped below 0.2%, the lowest in over a decade. International partners, once skeptical after the chaotic period, not only came back but also signed long-term contracts. The Midwest Tech leadership began publicly crediting Tom's contributions in shareholder meetings. In internal reports, his name always appeared alongside charts showing improvements in output and cost savings. But more importantly, the way workers, engineers, and even those who once disliked him now saw him as an irreplaceable pillar. Tom remained the same. Every day he still wore his old rubber boots, his faded technical jacket, and brought a lunchbox from home. He didn't enter the executive office. He didn't speak at conferences. Instead, he stayed on the factory floor, where the sound of machines and the smell of oil made him feel alive. One Friday afternoon, Jake Benson walked into the CEO's office with a tired expression. "I would like to submit my resignation," he said softly. "Are you sure, Jake? You were trained through the senior management program?" the CEO asked, a bit regretfully. Jake nodded. "I've learned a lot, but the most important thing I learned here is that I'm not cut out to replace someone like Tom Miller. This place doesn't need another manager. It needs a craftsman who can hear the machines breathe." No one stopped him. Jake left quietly, without scandal or blame. But everyone knew. It was the late regret of someone who once believed that machines only needed theory and spreadsheets. As for Tom, he never mentioned Jake after his departure. But that afternoon, after his shift, he sat at his old desk, now restored to its original place, and pulled out a folder. It was a basic technical training plan for the next generation of engineers. By hand, he redrew each system diagram, made notes on how to detect faults, how to listen for irregular bearing noises, how to smell the burnt scent of electrical wires, how to check air pressure with just a pencil. Some things must be passed down by hand, by eye, and by heart. He called the young engineers over. The group that once kept their distance, now attentively listening to every word, every bit of experience he shared. He didn't preach, he just told stories. Stories about the incident in 2003, the short circuit in 2009, the time he saved the entire production line from a fire in 2017, every detail still vivid in his memory. Gradually, Tom became a true teacher of the factory, despite never having stood in a classroom or held a teaching degree. The 6th month since his return, the Midwest Tech leadership held a small internal celebration. No fanfare, no big-lane guests. But that day, more than 200 factory employees showed up. A director stepped on stage and spoke with emotion. "We used to think that old people should retire, but Tom Miller showed us that experience, loyalty, and dedication are never outdated. He saved this place. With his heart." They then presented him with the factory's first honorary veteran engineer plaque, engraved with his name and the inscription, "The one who kept Midwest Tech breathing, not through authority but through knowledge and passion for the craft." Tom stood up. The whole hall applauded. No one saw him as the old technician who had been replaced anymore. They saw him as a living legend, someone who came back not for glory or gain, but to protect what he had once helped build. In 4220. "I will step down from the advisory role starting next month. It's time for the younger generation to take over. I'll always be around, but no longer directly involved. Lead with heart, not just with your head." And he did just that. Tom didn't come back for revenge. He came back to rebuild. With words, he made them feel it themselves by quietly and steadily proving, younger and cheaper doesn't always mean better. Skills, work ethics, and a sense of responsibility. These can't be replaced by Excel spreadsheets. And then, one day, Tom stopped coming to the factory. But every system still ran smoothly. Every process followed what he had set up. People called it the Tom Miller effect, an invisible legacy, but one that lives on in every sound the machines make here. Tom Miller's story is a powerful reminder that experience, dedication, and professional ethics never go out of style. In an age where many companies chase short-term costs and efficiency, it's easy to overlook the value of those quietly keeping the entire system running. Tom didn't seek revenge through anger, but through competence and perseverance, and that's what earned him true respect. In real life, anyone can be a Tom if they stay true to their craft and live with unwavering responsibility. What do you think about Tom Miller's story and how he chose to face being replaced? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories about life and family.